right. It is 2 o'clock. It is starting time. So today, lovely viewers, and lovely Larkin workers, we are going to Cadiz. Last time we were in Barcelona. Now we have, think about the other way. We have gone around the coast of Spain, through the Straits of Gibraltar between Spain and North Africa, into the little port town of Cadiz. And it's kind of near Seville. There were a bunch of excursions on the cruise where we could go into Seville, but we'd never been to Cadiz. It sounded like there was some pretty cool stuff there, so we just spent the day there instead and didn't spend time on a bus, which I like. So, first off, to give you just a little glimpse of the city, I love cities that it seems like in our city and in America, most of the time, everything has, all the foliage, all the landscaping has to be strictly ornamental. Like, no, we couldn't possibly publicly plant things that might feed people. But, that's not the case here. Cadiz has orange trees all over. Now, granted, they are bitter oranges. Yes, fruit, matricula. They are bitter oranges. They are not the kind you'd want to squeeze for juice, but it's still fruit. It still feels good and it gives it a homey feeling to walk around the streets and see oranges on the trees and go, I could pick one of those, and no one would yell at me for it. But apparently the bitter oranges make a really great marmalade, so there's that. So just a glimpse of the city and the foliage. And then a down the street view to give you an idea of a little bit of what the old town looks like. The tall buildings, getting as much into as little space as we can. Since it was a cruise that we were on, all of these towns that you're going to be seeing in this series are, well, almost all of them are going to be port towns. And I don't know if it's something about being by the sea, but you can see in this photo too, there was so much light-colored paint jobs, light-colored buildings, just very light and clean, and most of the buildings felt very cheerful, which was nice. Made it a lovely place to walk around in. So that's a little bit of the feel of the city, a little bit of the feel of the old town. And this is Cadiz's town hall. And if you look up here, over the columns, over the main entranceway, you can see right over there a couple of figures who are the two patron saints of the town, who weren't terribly interesting, so we're not going to talk about them much. And then right here in the triangle over the columns is the founder of the town, the totally literal founder of the town, obviously, Hercules. So let's get a better close-up of him. So here's Hercules, and he's a rough and tumble dude, dressed in his animal skins, with his shield and his Nemean lion on his right hand, and the pillars of Hercules beside him. Now, like I said, when we were coming from Barcelona over on the Mediterranean coast of Spain, down through the Straits of Gibraltar and around to Cadiz, the Straits of Gibraltar are one of the things that are known as the Pillars of Hercules. So most of us probably learned back in elementary school or whatever, that Hercules had to do 10, 12 labors, tasks, 10 quests. Because, why? As with so many things, because Hera got pissed at him. Hera got pissed at him and sent him into a fit of madness in which he killed his children and his wife. But even if the gods make you do something fucked up, you have still done something fucked up, and you still have to atone. Which feels relevant to modern conversations. She really kind of is Matricula. As a polytheist, functional polytheist, it's sometimes like, I get it. She's in a really shitty position a lot of the time, Hera is. But still, you're propping up the oppressors by punishing the victims instead of the oppressor husband. But this is the Serena Joy business, right? If you want to make it, if you want to get respect in the oppressive system with the abusive husband, you turn on the vulnerable. So yeah, she's kind of the worst. One of the worst. But so she strikes Hercules mad, but just like when our mental illnesses or our trauma cause us to be shitty to other people, we have still been shitty to other people. And it's our responsibility to make amends for that in whatever way we can. Hercules still has to atone for killing his wife and children in this induced madness. So he goes where he's told to go, speaks to the king he's told to speak to, who gives him this series of tasks. But apparently 10 becomes 12 because 2 got disqualified on a technicality, which is a very big thing in myths and folktales. So one of the bonus tasks is that Hercules has to go to the island of Erythea, which may be the same place as the Hesperides, which was sometimes identified with Cadiz, actually. And was kind of thought of in the literature as the westernmost border of anything. Beyond this be dragons or Atlantis. Okay, so essentially sending Hercules to the westernmost borders of civilization, probably beyond real civilization, to steal a flock of cattle from a monster who lives there. You know, typical task, right? So Hercules goes to modern-day Cadiz and gets the flock of cattle from the monster and starts bringing them back. Now, on his way back, he has to get back to Greece, right? So he comes upon a mountain, which maybe used to be Atlas. We're not real sure on that, but he comes upon a mountain that is in his way. And because Hercules, you don't see his club in this particular picture, but if he's pictured with a weapon, he's always pictured with a club. He is not a subtle dude. He doesn't use a sword, doesn't use a dagger. He bashes things over the head. He is not subtle. So when he comes to a mountain that is in his way, he doesn't go over it. He doesn't go around it. He plows through it. Splits that mountain open. And that's where we get the Straits of Gibraltar. Well, so there was that time that Hercules, Matricula, saying, get behind that. There was that time that Hercules was dressed as a lady for a while in the court of someone or another. But that's not part of this particular story. So he plunges through the mountain, splits it open, and that's where we get the Straits of Gibraltar. Half of the mountain became the African side, half the mountain became the Iberian side. And he takes the cattle across, brings them back. And who do they get sacrificed to? Hera. But so because Hercules visited here, he's credited with founding Cadiz. And clearly this story is alive and well in the popular imagination. We'll see the next place we go, Lisbon, has another legendary origin story, but it's not as ingrained as this one is. So the interesting thing, or one of the interesting things, is the Greeks say Hercules founded this place. And Cadiz is an old port city. Super old, very old. There were Roman temples here. But even older than that, the Phoenicians were here, right? And ancient seafaring, trading civilization, did a huge amount of exploring. And one of their big gods, Melqart, because the Greeks have to find a referent for everything they come across. So Isis gets identified with Aphrodite. Osiris gets identified with Hades or Dionysus, or wherever the Greeks go, the gods they find there, the heroes they find there, get identified with someone in their own pantheon. So when they encountered Melqart, this god who was a tutelary deity, he was a guy who brought civilization, right? brought civilization to the Phoenicians. He's the one who taught them how to build boats, who authorized contracts and set up how to trade decently and ethically, set up their whole way of life, all right, the way they made their wealth. Because of this, and maybe because of Melqart's reputation as a traveler, the Greeks thought of Melqart as the Tyrian Hercules. So there were temples to Melqart, and let's go ahead and get a look at him. This is not a picture of mine, unfortunately, but it seemed important for context. So this is a stela of one of the representations of Melqart in his lion-related form. So he's got the lion connection too. There's definitely power and importance in traveling, although I feel like Melqart is not quite as bash things over the head as Hercules is. The Greeks are determined to make things fit, even if they don't mesh nicely. So that's how a place originally settled by the Phoenicians, originally with temples to Melqart in place before the Greeks got there, became founded by Hercules. One of the things, so I heard about this on the boat, I think in the port talk for Cadiz, and I was skeptical because I had never heard of Melqart. But I looked it up. This is true facts. They were super excited to give him credit. I mean, your city grows in importance if you have a legendary founder, right? It's right, Matricula. So I got to do some research and learn about a new deity, which is always exciting for me. And oh, pardon me. That's my phone buzzing. And I found out that in addition to being syncretized with Hercules, Melqart is also, for those biblical scholars out there, probably the Baal talked about in the Old Testament. So when there are all those admonitions not to worship the Canaanite gods, not to worship Baal, that's probably this dude that they're talking about. Probably this guy. Because Baal is just a term for God or Lord. Not terribly specific. It's a title, not a name. But they think it was this dude, especially because he was a traveler, and there's that point where, I don't know if you remember, there's a point in First Kings book where the prophets of Baal and Elijah, prophet of the Israelites, are kind of having a deity dance off. Whose God is better? And when Baal doesn't come through for his prophets, his priests, Elijah's taunting them and saying, "Cry out loud. I mean, he's a god after all. Maybe he's lost in thought. Maybe he's wandered away or is on a journey. Maybe he's sleeping and has to be wakened." And that could be seen as referencing Melqart's nature as a traveler, or as one of those gods that you have to wake up from his winter slumber every spring. So I thought that was pretty cool. Synchronization, learning about new deities, it's good times. Then, any And feel free to jump in with questions, of course, if you have them. So I included just a couple of pictures. The other things I want to talk about today were largely in Cadiz Cathedral. So first off, just a shot of some of the interior, focusing on the altar area, so you can get an idea of what it's like inside. It was very pretty. You can't see this here, but there were nets under the ceiling because they started building with marble and then they ran out of funds and had to keep building with limestone. And limestone is not nearly as hard or stable as marble. So because they don't want the tourists or the worshippers getting stone on their heads, there are now nets over the under the ceiling in the sanctuary. Right. No stoning in church. Right, Matricula. No stoning in the church. That's outside the church, unless Jesus is there to save you. So a glimpse at what the altar area looks like. And this huge monstrosity. So this, just for scale, this is a whole side chapel, right? So if there had been an actual human for scale, I might have come up about this far on it if I were standing by it. So it's tall. It is largely made of silver. It's a monstrance, which for those who are not Catholic among you is what they use to store the consecrated host between masses. And it's often used as a place to honor the host, to venerate it. And if you notice, there are handles on this one. And our guide said that, "Hey Crafty, hi, welcome. We are taking a look at this huge silver monstrance, which I don't remember how much our guide said it weighs, but it is heavy and large, and it gets shouldered up and carried through the streets of town on festival days, Holy Week specifically, but other major festival days as well. And, in other places, you train for marathons. Everyone knows you train for marathons. In Cadiz, you train to be one of the monstrance bearers, because that takes strength and cardio to get that through the streets. It really is crafty. Monstrance is an excellent word. I don't feel like it's one of those words that does not necessarily sound like the object looks. But that's okay. It's still a great word. So this was pretty neat. It was definitely the biggest and most impressive item of this kind we saw on the trip. And then, so this is our old friend, Saint Sebastian, who we met last week in Barcelona. Pardon me. And when we met him in Barcelona, if you remember, it was the sexy one. Indeed, Matricula. That's right. But in Barcelona, the big representation of him, he was all dressed up in Renaissance garb, and he had a bow on his shoulder and a quiver, and he looked like he was ready to go hunting instead of be stuck full of arrows. So I thought I'd show you another representation of him, and I should have thought to zoom in more. You can't quite see, but there are arrows sculpted into this representation of him, just sticking out of him, sitting there being all penetrated. And so, as I was doing my research for this stream, I decided I wanted to include him, and I was just doing a little poking around, seeing if there were any little tidbits that I had missed the first time and wanted to include, and lo and behold, there are. So there was a bit from one of the recordings of his lives that says, when he was taken outside to be tied to a pole and martyred with arrows, said, "And the archers shot at him till he was as full of arrows as an urchin is full of pricks." And I know they don't mean pricks in a dirty way, but it just blends real nicely with his position as if we had queer saints, as a pretty queer saint. Really, really crafty, really, really. And I also didn't know that the arrows didn't actually kill him. I mean, so often the saints are pictured with the instruments or at the moment of their martyrdom. But the arrows didn't actually kill him, because a righteous widow went to retrieve his body to bury it and found that he wasn't dead. So she took him home, nursed him back to health, and later, after he was healthy again, because martyrs have no self-preservation instincts, this is part of the job description, he goes back to the staircase by the place where the current emperor Diocletian, who was the one who sent him to be martyred anyway in the first place. So he goes to stand by the staircase where the emperor is supposed to pass by and let him have it for persecuting Christians. Just yelling at him, calling him out for persecuting Christians. And the appearance and verbosity of, right? It's very ballsy, so to speak. The appearance of someone that the emperor really thought was dead was not a small surprise. Was in fact a very large surprise to this emperor. But he recovered, he got his cool back, and he gave orders for St. Sebastian to be seized and beat to death with cudgels. It's the only way to be sure. And then his body thrown in the sewer. After which, yes, crafty, once you've been full of arrows, there's probably not a lot left to fear. I feel like it might give you a little bit of an overconfidence as shown by this, but if you're willing to face death, gotta get that martyr's palm. So after he's been beaten with cudgels, thrown in the sewer, another pious lady received a vision of Saint Sebastian, who urged her to recover his body, which she did, and saw to it that it was buried, and they built a church on the site. But who knew? Shot full of arrows, then beaten to death with cudgels. I will admit that the shot full of arrows picture is a much more dramatic representation. Really makes much better art than just the being beaten to death with cudgels. Lots more opportunity, as we saw last week, for some sexy shirtlessness and pensive. I'm so detached from this, and my thoughts are already on heaven or what we're going to have for dinner tonight. No, Crafty, he did not survive the second one. He's a martyr, not Rasputin. We'll get there. We'll get to Rasputin. Or St. Petersburg, at least. There's a lot in St. Petersburg, so we might not get to Rasputin. But just the one. Just the one. You have to eventually die if you're a martyr. Well, okay. We can talk about Rasputin. There was when we get to St. Petersburg, there was one of the educational talks we had on the boat was actually a two-part on who Rasputin is and how he died. And the guy who did these talks was my favorite speaker on the boat. He was really good and very self-aware. But the bastard cliffhangered us on the first one. Got us right up to the death. It was like, gotta come back next time. So, I will not do that to y'all. I promise. But I did find out, actually, this will be fun to talk about when we get there. So I did find out new things about heretical sects. But sects, not sex, although that too, maybe. Rumors of, that I had not been previously aware of. So, I will put that on the list. We might have to have multiple St. Petersburg based things. So, St. Sebastian. Next in the cathedral. Do I have a close-up? No, I don't. Sorry. We'll get there. All right. So right here is another one of the little side chapels in the cathedral. We've got a lovely female saint. Maybe she's Mary, maybe she's someone else. I'm not really sure. In the little niche. But the cool / fucked up part of this is right down in front of the niche is a crucified infant Christ. Right there. Right there. I should have zoomed in on it. But it's right there, down in front. Crucified infant Christ. And dark, right? Dark. One of the things that I noticed, and we'll see more of this next time, is Iberian Peninsula Catholicism is heavy. It's visceral. It's messed up. It doesn't get away. It does not pull punches. And it doesn't shy away from blood and guts and gore and veins in your teeth. Yeah. It's the kind of Catholicism that will show you a crucified child. I just thought, I'd never seen this representation before, and I just thought, hey, Iberian Catholicism, some of the Iberian Catholic art is really fucked up. This is a particularly fucked up example. But there's a story. So in 1628, so in the first half of the 17th century, on Mount Pichincha, or Pichincha? Pichincha? I may be mangling that pronunciation. A vision of the Christ child crucified appeared to a nun. So this began as a vision, and the site that I was doing some reading on said verbatim, "This is the origin of a popular Spanish devotion." So this isn't an isolated representation, okay? Just like there are, I say cults, but not in the derogatory sense, which is a problematic thing anyway. There are cults of devotion around the Sacred Heart, around various representations and appearances of Mary. There's a cult of devotion around the Christ child crucified. And in all these representations, he appears as a child or adolescent. And the idea is that even at this young age, Jesus knew what was coming and embraced it, which falls in line with folk beliefs about Christ's childhood and upbringing, but isn't very biblical at all, really. But it falls in line with a lot of folk songs and stories and apocrypha about Christ as a child. Had some pretty heavy knowledge right from the start about what his purpose was, where he was going to end up. One of the quotes associated with this is that in this representation, that the Christ child is asking us, how can I do more to show my love for you? Which is also messed up. So let's not get away from that. So yeah, super duper messed up. This is a preview of things get more intense when we get into Portugal. Yeah, it's hard. So, new representations of Christ for me. And then we go down into the crypt. Now, most crypts are full of interesting funerary art, interesting tombs, sometimes some cool sculptures associated with famous folks' tombs, that kind of thing. And that's what I was expecting, right? However, Cadiz, the crypt in the Cathedral of Cadiz, has its very own, ostensibly, incorrupt saint. Saint Victoria, martyr. Yeah. Like I said, they don't pull punches. I should have probably put a content warning on this one. I need to remember to do that. So, as with so many saints, there are a few different stories about who this girl is and how she got here. Okay. Our guide told us that she was originally a local girl, little girl, who had an incurable illness and prayed every day in the church to be cured. And she said, some people think she was cured. Well, okay, but then what did she die of to get here? And said, and some people think that she died, but I guess that's a happy ending too, because now she's in heaven. Our guide did not sound very convinced, which is good, because and now they're in heaven excuses, it does not hold much water for those left behind. Let's not even. Other story, when I went to do some research, says, kind of in accordance with what our guide told us, that St. Victoria, the one shown here, was a very pious local girl who went to pray every day in the cathedral, but on the day of her communion, her first communion, she fell ill and couldn't go through with it. So the bishop at the time came to her to give her communion, and at the moment of her taking communion for the first time, she died, which is pretty intense. But also, according to Catholic, in a Catholic framework, that's probably the best way to know that you're in a state of grace when you die. Right at communion, you've confessed, you haven't had any time to do any more sinning. Also, you're a child, so you're just freshly responsible for your sins in the first place. So she died at the moment of her first communion and was buried. But a week later, or after a few weeks probably, the story is that there was a family dispute of some kind. I don't know what kind of family dispute causes you to open a 12, 13-year-old girl's tomb, but there was a dispute that caused her tomb to be opened and her body exhumed for some purpose. And they found that her body was incorrupt. It wasn't decaying, it wasn't degraded, which is a major mark of sainthood. So she was preserved and put in the church on display. Yes, clearly matricula. Always a good day for an exhumation. Alternate story is that she was not a local girl at all. But that there was a time in the 19th century when there was a big decline in church attendance and the faithfulness of the local parishioners. Things weren't going super well for the church. And the bishop of the time, I'm just going to say Bishop Delgado, so that I do not mangle the rest of his name. Bishop Delgado wanted to encourage a renewal of faith and church attendance, and not to be cynical, but probably donations too. So in order to do this, it's known it's documented somewhere, who knows how reliably, that on a receipt dated August 24th, 1816, that a cardinal handed over to Bishop Delgado the sacred body of Santa Victoria, Virgin and Martyr, who had been exhumed by mandate of the current Pope from where she had originally been buried, which I believe was in Italy, but it was not local. It's not local. This is a much older saint who was getting exhumed and then moved to Cadiz to be displayed in a glass container and dressed up in something resembling a First Communion dress, wrapped in a shroud. And what you can't see here, although you can see the edge of a little sign here, but what you can't really see is that's right, Crafty. That story is entirely different, and probably the more likely one, because it comments on the self-serving nature of the church. Yes. So there's a little sign here, kind of in the same style as this one. A little sign that says "Sangre de Santa Victoria," so blood of Santa Victoria. And if you'll give me a second, I'm going to try and. Oop. Is everything is still okay, right? Okay. There we go. Yeah, so Sangre de Santa Victoria, right there. And right down front from it is a vial, ostensibly of her blood, because saints' relics are a thing. Now, how did they get the blood out if she had already been dead for weeks before she was exhumed? This is a mystery. This is a mystery of faith. We don't know. So this is not altogether a super reliable story. Most saint stories aren't. But this was definitely the first time that I had ever seen what was meant to be a saint on display. Just right out there. Not a single relic. Not, a bit of hair or a bit of toenail or a foreskin, because anything is a relic. If you can find it and you can sell it, anything is a relic. But the whole saint. Whole thing. So that was pretty impressive and creepy. Yeah. So those are two of the big stories that I heard and wanted to draw on in Cadiz. Crafty Matricula, did y'all have any questions, any thoughts? It was pretty cool. Pretty gruesome, actually. That's the word I've been looking for. Iberian Catholicism can get pretty gruesome, pretty unapologetically. It goes from 0 to 100 just super fast. But I was really fascinated. I was really fascinated to learn. Sorry, hold on. When we um, when we were in Spain, one of the talks that was given was on Moorish Spain, the Moorish influence in Spain, and so I had a pretty good idea of Islamic art influencing Spanish art, and Islamic culture interplaying and meshing with Spanish Iberian cultures. But it was neat to learn that Cadiz has a history as far back as the Greeks, as the Phoenicians, as these sort of ancient seafaring civilizations. That was pretty neat for me. It's easy sometimes to think in terms of these people have always been here, even though we know that's not true. Even in our own America, we have the problematic tendency to think of our history beginning with the European settlers coming over. So whoever the dominant group is, we tend to think, oh yes, the history of the place is the history of the dominant group. And that's not true. And I enjoyed complicating and expanding my understanding of that history around this particular place. We did not. Cadiz is also, so Seville is a big sherry producer. And we did not have time to try the local sherry. I wish we had, but we did not. We heard a lot about it though. So yeah, it was sad. I didn't get to try nearly as much of the local food and drink as I would have ideally liked, because when you have a meal plan on the boat, it can seem a little excessive to go eat somewhere else. At least that's what spouse says. So, alas. Anyway, so that is a brief and gruesome trip through the identity and saints of Cadiz. Yeah, I know, right? Dear spouse, lighten up. Thank y'all for being here, for listening and chatting. And we will be back next week with Lisbon and Porto all in one go. Yay! Thank you, Crafty. And I think you came in after we talked about Hercules and Phoenician deities, but the video on demand will be up after this, and I talk all about that in the beginning if you want to hear about Hercules and how he's probably a Phoenician deity as well. So it was wonderful. Have an awesome afternoon. Oh, should we find someone to go mini raid? Let's see. Let's find someone to go mini raid. Are there any suggestions? Let's see. Who is online? Let's see. So Benjamin Bright appears to be online right now. So we will go. Yeah, I think let's go over to Benjamin Bright. So let's see if I'm gonna copy my own raid call because I forgot to do that last time. All right. Yay! I am figuring this thing out. Thank you all for being here, and I will see you next week. Yay! Thank you, Crafty. Thank you, Matricula. Thank you to the lurkers. We will go raid Benjamin, and yes.